step aboard the luxurious midnight express, where elegance masks a web of secrets. When a brash American businessman is found stabbed in a locked compartment, only Hercule Poirot, with his brilliant mind and unerring instinct, can unravel the truth. A stolen knife, a crushed cigar, a hidden murderer, every passenger is a suspect, and every clue a piece of a deadly puzzle. In a snowbound train racing towards Istanbul, deception runs as deep as the night. Will Poirot's little grey cells triumph before the journey's end? The clock is ticking on this thrilling tale of murder and mystery. Chapter 1. The Departure. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the bustling platform of Victoria Station, where the air thrummed with the restless anticipation of departure. Porters darted through the crowd, their trolleys piled high with steamer trunks and valises, while the sharp whistle of the locomotive pierced the clamour of voices. The Midnight Express, its blue and gold carriages gleaming like a string of sapphires, stood ready to embark on its grand journey to Istanbul. Amid this orchestrated chaos stood Hercule Poirot, his small, fastidious figure a picture of composure. His grey suit, tailored to perfection, complemented the impeccable curl of his moustache, waxed to a fine point. His green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, surveyed the scene with a quiet, almost predatory curiosity. Beside him, Captain Arthur Hastings shifted uncomfortably, clutching his ticket as though it might escape. His tweed suit, though smart, lacked the pristine elegance of Poirot's attire, and his boyish face betrayed a hint of impatience. "I say, Poirot," he remarked, glancing at the throng of travellers, "it's a bit of a crush, isn't it? Hardly the serene start one expects for such a luxurious journey." Poirot tilted his head, a faint smile playing beneath his moustache. "Mon cher Hastings, a train such as this, the Midnight Express, is no mere vehicle. It is a stage, a world in miniature, where the passions and secrets of its passengers are confined within its elegant walls. Mark my words, there will be drama before we reach Istanbul." Hastings chuckled, his scepticism as English as his accent. "You and your theatrical notions, Poirot. It's just a train ride after all." "Perhaps," Poirot replied, his voice soft but laced with conviction. "But the human heart, it does not travel lightly." As they boarded, Poirot's keen eyes catalogued the passengers ascending the carriage steps. There was Countess Irina Volkov, a statuesque Russian with alabaster skin, her sable furs trailing behind her like a royal train. Her dark eyes held a melancholy grace, though Poirot noted the calculated poise in her movements. Nearby, Mr. Leonard Baxter, an American businessman with a brash demeanour, barked orders at a porter, his pinstriped suit straining slightly at the waist. His loud voice carried across the platform, proclaiming his importance to anyone within earshot. Miss Clara Henshaw, a prim English governess, clutched a worn carpet bag, her grey dress as subdued as her demeanour, though her eyes darted nervously, betraying an inner disquiet. Signor Giovanni Rossi, an Italian opera singer, swept past with a flourish, his scarlet scarf fluttering like a banner, his laughter as operatic as his profession. Mehmet Bey, a Turkish diplomat, moved with quiet dignity, his cigarette case glinting in the fading light. Finally, a young couple, Mr. and Mrs. Edward Lyle, boarded hand in hand, their honeymoon glow tempered by an anxious edge, as though they carried a secret heavier than their luggage. The conductor, a wiry man with a meticulous uniform, ushered Poirot and Hastings to their first-class compartments. Poirot's was a marvel of compact luxury. Polished mahogany panels, a plush berth, and a small washstand with gleaming fixtures. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, satisfied with the symmetry, and murmured, "Order and method, Hastings. They are the foundation of all things." As the train jolted into motion, its wheels singing against the tracks, Poirot stood at the window, watching London's grey skyline fade into the dusk. The rhythm of the train was soothing, yet his mind was alert, attuned to the subtle currents of human behaviour. He had observed the Countess's fleeting glance at Mehmet Bey, the way Baxter's hand lingered on his briefcase, the tremor in Miss Henshaw's fingers as she clutched her bag. Each gesture, each glance, was a thread in the tapestry of human motives, and Poirot's little grey cells were already weaving them together. In the corridor, Hastings paused, peering through the glass door of the dining car, where waiters were setting tables with crisp linens and silver cutlery. "Care for a drink before dinner, Poirot?" he called. Poirot shook his head, his expression enigmatic. "Not yet, mon ami. First, I observe, the Midnight Express has begun its journey, and with it, the stories of its passengers. Let us see what secrets the night will reveal." As the train plunged into the gathering darkness, its whistle echoing like a herald of mysteries to come, Poirot settled into his compartment, unaware that the stage was set for a crime that would test even his formidable intellect. Chapter 2. The First Night. The Midnight Express sliced through the night, its wheels humming a steady rhythm against the tracks as it sped toward the continent. The air inside the train was warm, almost stifling, despite the chill of the autumn evening beyond the windows. The dining car, aglow with the soft light of crystal chandeliers, was a tableau of elegance. White-gloved waiters glided between tables, their movements as precise as a ballet, serving consommé, roast pheasant, and delicate pastries to passengers who conversed in a symphony of languages. The clink of silver against porcelain mingled with the murmur of voices, creating an atmosphere both convivial and curiously charged, as though the very air anticipated something unspoken. Hercule Poirot sat at a small table near the centre of the car, his posture impeccable, his fork poised with the precision of a surgeon. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, darted from face to face, cataloguing the smallest details of his fellow travellers. To his left, Countess Irina Volkov sipped her wine, her movements languid, her fur stole draped artfully over one shoulder. Her dark hair, swept into an elegant chignon, gleamed under the light, and her conversation with Mehmet Bey, the Turkish diplomat, was conducted in low, melodic tones that carried a hint of secrecy. Mehmet, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, leaned forward slightly, his cigarette case resting beside his plate, its silver surface catching the chandelier's glow. His dark eyes were attentive, but Poirot noted a certain reserve in his posture, as though he guarded a thought he did not wish to share. Across the car, Leonard Baxter, the American businessman, dominated his table with a booming voice, his gestures expansive as he debated some point of commerce with Signor Giovanni Rossi. The Italian opera singer, his scarlet scarf loosened but still flamboyant, responded with theatrical flourishes, his laughter ringing out like a note from one of his arias. Baxter's pinstriped suit strained slightly as he leaned forward, his face flushed from wine or conviction, and Poirot observed the faint gleam of a gold cufflink, a monogrammed LB, catching the light. At a smaller table, Miss Clara Henshaw sat alone, her grey dress blending almost invisibly with the shadows. Her hands, clasped tightly around a teacup, trembled slightly, and her eyes darted toward the other passengers with a nervousness that seemed to border on fear. The young Lyles, Edward and Eleanor, sat at the far end, their heads bent close together, their whispers barely audible. Eleanor's delicate hand rested on her husband's arm, but her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with something Poirot could not yet name. Captain Hastings, seated opposite Poirot, dabbed his mouth with a napkin and leaned back, his expression one of mild bemusement. "Quite a crowd, eh, Poirot?" he said, his voice carrying the easy cheer of a man accustomed to simpler gatherings. I don't know how you keep track of them all. That Baxter chap's loud enough to wake the dead, and Rossi's not much quieter. Makes me glad we've got a peaceful journey ahead." Poirot's lips curved into a faint, enigmatic smile. "Peaceful, mon ami? Perhaps. But the human heart, it is rarely at peace, especially in such close quarters. Each of these passengers carries a story. Hastings and stories. They have a way of colliding." Hastings chuckled, shaking his head. "You're always looking for mysteries, old chap. Sometimes a train is just a train." "Non, non," Poirot replied, his tone soft but firm. "A train is never just a train. It is a crucible where motives and desires are pressed together, and the truth, it will always emerge." The meal progressed, the waiters clearing plates with silent efficiency. Poirot declined dessert, preferring a small cup of black coffee, its aroma sharp and grounding. He noted the Countess's refusal of a second glass of wine, her hand brushing Mehmet's as she passed him the sugar bowl, a gesture too deliberate to be accidental. Baxter, meanwhile, had grown louder, his conversation veering into a tirade about railway investments in the East, his words drawing a frown from Mehmet Bey. Rossi, ever the performer, countered with a story of a scandalous opera premiere, his hands painting the air with dramatic arcs. Miss Henshaw excused herself early, her teacup rattling as she set it down, and Poirot's eyes followed her as she slipped into the corridor, her steps quick and uneven. The Lyells, too, departed soon after, Eleanor's hand gripping Edward's tightly as they passed Poirot's table. As the dining car emptied, Poirot lingered, his coffee untouched. The conductor, Monsieur Duval, approached, his uniform crisp, his face etched with the weary politeness of a man accustomed to managing demanding passengers. "Is everything to your satisfaction, Monsieur Poirot?" he asked, his French accent tinged with a hint of Belgian pride. "Oui, Monsieur Duval," Poirot replied, his voice smooth. "The service, it is impeccable. But tell me, you have observed these passengers. Is there anything unusual you have noted?" Duval hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the now empty tables. "They are a varied group, monsieur. The American Monsieur Baxter, he is loud, yes, but generous with tips. The Countess, she keeps to herself, but her maid mentioned she travels with many jewels. The young couple, the Lyells, they seem anxious. But it is a honeymoon, no? Nerves are to be expected." Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "And the others? The Italian, Signor Rossi. He is all charm. But he asked many questions about the train schedule. Too many, perhaps. The governess, Mademoiselle Henshaw. She is quiet, but I saw her linger near Monsieur Baxter's compartment this afternoon, though she said she was lost. Monsieur Mehmet Bey. He is a diplomat, very correct, but he smokes in the corridor late at night. It is not permitted, but I have not yet spoken to him." "Merci, Monsieur Duval," Poirot said, his mind cataloguing each detail. "You have the observant eye, which is most useful." Duval bowed slightly and retreated, leaving Poirot to his thoughts. The dining car was now nearly deserted, save for a lone waiter polishing glasses at the far end. Poirot rose, adjusting his tie, and made his way to the corridor, where the sway of the train was more pronounced. The passage was lined with polished wood and brass fittings, the soft glow of wall sconces casting long shadows. He paused outside his compartment, his ears attuned to the sounds of the night, the creak of the carriage, the distant clatter of dishes being cleared, the faint murmur of voices from neighbouring compartments. It was then that he heard it, a sharp, muffled cry, abrupt and quickly silenced, as though someone had stifled it mid-breath. It came from the direction of the first-class compartments, followed by the unmistakable thud of a door slamming shut. Poirot's senses sharpened, his hand resting lightly on the door frame of his compartment. He stepped into the corridor, his patent leather shoes silent on the carpet, and moved toward the source of the sound. The passage was empty, the doors to the compartments closed, their brass numbers gleaming faintly. At the far end, near the junction to the next carriage, a faint glow flickered. A cigarette, its tip burning red in the dimness. Mehmet Bey stood there, his silhouette sharp against the window, his face half hidden in shadow. He exhaled a thin stream of smoke, the scent acrid in the confined space. "Bonsoir, monsieur," Poirot said, approaching with measured steps. "You find the night air conducive to reflection, perhaps?" Mehmet Bey turned, his dark eyes meeting Poirot's with a guarded intensity. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice low and accented with a trace of Constantinople, "I could not sleep. The motion of the train, it unsettles me." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "It is curious, is it not, how the rhythm of the rails can soothe one man and disturb another? But perhaps it is not the train that keeps you awake, but something else. A sound, perhaps, in the night." Mehmet's fingers tightened briefly around his cigarette case, the silver catching the light. "I heard nothing, monsieur, only the usual noises of a train." "Bien sûr," Poirot said, his tone light but his eyes piercing. "Yet the night, it has a way of amplifying the smallest disturbances. A cry, a door, these things, they linger in the mind." Mehmet exhaled another plume of smoke, his face impassive. "You have a keen ear, Monsieur Poirot, but I assure you, I was merely taking the air." Poirot inclined his head, his smile polite but unyielding. "Of course, monsieur. I wish you a restful night." As he returned to his compartment, Poirot's mind churned. The cry, the slammed door, Mehmet's presence in the corridor, they were pieces of a puzzle, as yet unformed. He entered his compartment, locking the door behind him, and stood at the small window, watching the dark landscape blur past. The train was now deep in the French countryside, the stars obscured by a veil of clouds. The air felt heavy, not with the warmth of the carriage, but with a sense of impending revelation. Poirot sat on the edge of his berth, his hands folded neatly in his lap. The cry had been brief, but it carried the weight of fear or surprise. The slammed door suggested haste, perhaps concealment, and Mehmet Bey, smoking in the corridor at midnight. His calm demeanour was too perfect, too composed. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with activity, arranging and rearranging the facts, seeking the pattern that would make sense of the night's unease. He rose, adjusting the curtains to block the faint light from the corridor, and prepared for bed. But sleep, he knew, would not come easily. The midnight express was more than a train. It was a stage, and the players upon it were already moving toward a drama he could sense but not yet name. As he lay down, the distant rumble of the train seemed to echo the pulse of his thoughts, each revolution of the wheels bringing him closer to the truth. The night deepened, and the midnight express sped on, carrying its passengers and their secrets into the unknown. Chapter 3. The Body. The midnight express stood motionless in a desolate alpine pass, its gleaming carriages shrouded in the grey light of dawn. A minor avalanche had blocked the tracks during the night, halting the train amidst snow-dusted peaks that loomed like silent sentinels. The air was crisp, the windows frosted with delicate patterns, and the passengers, roused earlier than usual, murmured their discontent in the dining car over hastily served coffee. Hercule Poirot, however, was unperturbed by the delay. He sat in his compartment, his morning routine undisturbed, adjusting his tie with the precision of a clockmaker. His green eyes, ever alert, flickered toward the window, where the stark beauty of the Alps contrasted with the growing unease he felt within the train. Captain Hastings burst into the compartment, his face flushed with agitation, his tweed coat slightly askew. "Poirot, you must come at once," he exclaimed, his voice tight with urgency. "There's been a ghastly business in compartment 12. Baxter, the American. He's dead." Poirot's eyebrows rose, but his composure remained intact. "Dead, you say? Natural element, or otherwise?" He rose smoothly, retrieving his hat and cane, his movements deliberate. "Murdered, Poirot. Stabbed, they say. The conductor's in a panic." "Calm yourself, mon ami," Poirot said, his tone soothing yet firm. "The panic, it obscures the truth. Let us go to compartment 12 and see what the little grey cells can uncover." The corridor was a hive of whispers, as passengers, roused by the commotion, peered from their compartments. Poirot and Hastings navigated past the curious glances. Arriving at compartment 12, where Monsieur Duval, the conductor, stood guard, his face pale beneath his peaked cap. A small crowd had gathered. Countess Irina Volkov, her fur stole clutched tightly. Signor Giovanni Rossi, his scarf askew, and Miss Clara Henshaw, her hands wringing a handkerchief. The Lyles hovered at the edge, Eleanor's face buried in Edward's shoulder, while Mehmet Bey stood apart, his cigarette unlit, his dark eyes unreadable. "Monsieur, madame," Poirot said, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. "I ask that you return to your compartments. This is a matter for investigation." The passengers dispersed reluctantly, their footsteps echoing in the narrow corridor. Duval unlocked the door to compartment 12, and Poirot stepped inside, Hastings close behind. The scene that greeted them was one of stark violence, jarring against the compartment's luxurious fittings. Leonard Baxter lay sprawled across the berth, his pinstriped shirt stained a deep crimson around a knife embedded in his chest. His eyes, wide and glassy, stared at the ceiling, frozen in a moment of shock or defiance. The bedclothes were tangled, as though he had struggled briefly, and a faint metallic tang hung in the air. Poirot's gaze swept the room with clinical precision. The compartment was a mirror of his own. Mahogany panels, a small washstand, a narrow wardrobe, and a window sealed tight against the alpine chill. The lock on the door was intact, its key still in place. The knife, protruding from Baxter's chest, was an ornate affair, its handle inlaid with mother-of-pearl, glinting faintly in the morning light. On the bedside table, a gold watch ticked softly, its hands frozen at 2:17. Beside it lay an empty wallet, its leather worn but empty of notes. A half-smoked cigar rested on the floor, its tip crushed as though stamped out in haste. Hastings, his face pale, whispered, "Good Lord, Poirot! Stabbed in a locked compartment! It's like something out of a novel." Poirot knelt beside the body, his gloved fingers hovering over the knife without touching it. "A novel, perhaps, but not fiction, Hastings. This is real, and the truth, it hides in the details." He examined the cigar, noting a faint smudge on its paper, a trace of colour, perhaps lipstick. Rising, he inspected the wallet, its emptiness stark against the opulence of the watch. "Curieux," he murmured. "The wallet is empty, yet the watch remains. A thief who takes paper but leaves gold? No, this is not robbery." Duval, hovering nervously at the door, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, the compartment was locked from the inside when the steward tried to rouse Monsieur Baxter this morning. It was Mademoiselle Henshaw who heard a noise and alerted us. We had to use the master key to enter." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing as he studied the window. Its latch was secure, the glass unmarred by cracks or scratches. And the steward, he heard nothing in the night? "Nothing, monsieur. Except, well, he mentioned a faint thud, perhaps around midnight, but he thought it was luggage shifting in the baggage car." "Midnight," Poirot repeated, his voice soft. He recalled the muffled cry and slammed door he had heard the previous night, the cigarette glow of Mehmet Bey in the corridor. And Mademoiselle Henshaw, she was nearby? She was in the corridor, monsieur, returning to her compartment after taking the air, she said. "Bien," Poirot said, his mind already turning. "Monsieur Duval, please ensure no one enters this compartment. Hastings, we must speak with the passengers, but first, I must observe." He moved to the wardrobe, opening it to reveal Baxter's neatly hung suits and a small leather case. Inside the case, Poirot found a bundle of papers, letters, contracts, and a railway timetable, all meticulously organized. One document caught his eye, a draft agreement for a railway venture in Anatolia, with Baxter's bold signature alongside another name, Mehmet Bey. Poirot's lips pursed slightly, but he said nothing, tucking the observation away. Hastings, peering over his shoulder, frowned. "What's that, Poirot? Business dealings?" "Perhaps, Hastings. But business, it can be a motive as powerful as passion. We shall see." Poirot turned his attention to the berth, noting a single strand of dark hair on the pillow, too long to be Baxter's. He pocketed it discreetly, his movements swift and unobtrusive. The crushed cigar, the empty wallet, the ornate knife. These were not random elements, but pieces of a deliberate design. He stepped back, his hands clasped behind him, his head tilted as though listening to an invisible orchestra. "Hastings," he said at last, "this is no simple crime. The locked door, the untouched watch, the knife so ostentatious, it is a puzzle, yes, but one with a solution. The murderer wished to tell us something, or perhaps to hide something else." Hastings shook his head, bewildered. "But how, Poirot? The door was locked, the window sealed. Unless the killer climbed out through the roof, I don't see how they escaped." Poirot's eyes twinkled with a hint of amusement. "The roof, no, but the mind, it must remain open. The impossible is only that which we have not yet understood. Come, we must speak with Mademoiselle Henshaw and the others. The truth, it lies in their words and in what they do not say." As they left the compartment, Poirot paused, casting a final glance at Baxter's lifeless form. The American's brash voice was silenced, but his death spoke loudly, and Hercule Poirot was determined to listen. Chapter 4. The Passengers. The dining car of the Midnight Express, usually a haven of clinking crystal and lively chatter, had taken on a sombre air. The passengers, summoned by Monsieur Duval at Poirot's request, sat in uneasy silence, their faces a gallery of apprehension and curiosity. The train remained stranded in the Alpine Pass, the snow outside falling in soft, relentless flakes, as if nature itself conspired to hold them captive. Hercule Poirot stood at the head of the car, his small, fastidious figure commanding attention despite his unassuming stature. His moustache, perfectly symmetrical, gleamed under the chandelier's light, and his green eyes swept over the assembled group with an intensity that made more than one passenger shift uncomfortably. Captain Hastings stood near the door, his arms crossed, his expression a mixture of concern and admiration for his friend's composure. The passengers were arranged at the tables. Countess Irina Volkov, her sable stole draped over her shoulders, her face pale but composed. Signor Giovanni Rossi, his flamboyant scarf loosened, his hands fidgeting with a silver cigarette lighter. Miss Clara Henshaw, her grey dress blending with the shadows, her eyes fixed on her folded hands. Mehmet Bey, his dark suit immaculate, his cigarette case closed tightly in his grip, and the Lyles, Edward and Eleanor, sitting close together, their faces drawn, their hands clasped as if to anchor each other against the storm of suspicion. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and measured, cutting through the tension like a well-honed blade. "A tragedy has occurred aboard this train. Monsieur Leonard Baxter has been murdered in his compartment, stabbed with a knife of unusual design, in a room locked from within. I, Hercule Poirot, have taken it upon myself to uncover the truth. A crime such as this, it is an affront to order, and order, it must be restored. I ask for your cooperation, and I assure you, the guilty will not escape the scrutiny of my little grey cells." A murmur rippled through the group, but no one spoke. Irina Volkov's eyes flickered briefly toward Mehmet Bey, while Rossi's fingers stilled on his lighter. Miss Henshaw's lips parted as if to speak, but she quickly pressed them shut. Edward Lisle tightened his grip on his wife's hand, and Eleanor's gaze dropped to the table. Poirot continued, his tone calm but unyielding. "I will speak with each of you in turn to understand your movements last night. The truth, it is like a delicate thread. It may be hidden, but it cannot be broken. Let us begin." He gestured to a small table at the side, where he and Hastings would conduct the interviews. The passengers exchanged glances, some wary, others defiant, but all complied as Duval ushered them forward one by one. First was Countess Irina Volkov. She glided to the table, her movements graceful but deliberate, as though every step was a performance. She sat, crossing her hands delicately, her sapphire ring catching the light. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice low and accented with the cadence of St. Petersburg, "this is a terrible affair. I knew Monsieur Baxter only slightly, from introductions in Paris. He was loud, but harmless, I thought." Poirot's eyes narrowed slightly. "And last night, madame, where were you after dinner?" "I retired to my compartment at perhaps 10 o'clock, she replied, her gaze steady. "I was tired from the day's travel. My maid, Anna, can confirm this. I heard nothing unusual, only the sounds of the train. And this knife," Poirot said, producing a sketch of the murder weapon, its mother-of-pearl handle meticulously drawn. "It is familiar to you." Irina's composure faltered for a fraction of a second, her fingers tightening on her stole. "It resembles one I own," she admitted, "but it has been missing for days. I thought it lost in Paris. Surely you do not suspect me, monsieur?" Poirot smiled faintly. "I suspect only the truth, madame." "Merci." Next came Signor Giovanni Rossi, who approached with a theatrical sweep of his hand, as if stepping onto a stage. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice rich with Italian warmth, "this is a tragedy, a scandal. I, Giovanni Rossi, am a man of passion, yes, but not of violence." Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped. "And yet, signor, you were heard arguing with Monsieur Baxter last night, after dinner. A business matter, perhaps?" Rossi's eyes widened, then narrowed. "A discussion, not an argument. Baxter, he wished to invest in my next opera, but his terms, they were insulting. We spoke in the corridor, near his compartment, but I left him alive, I swear it. I returned to my own berth and slept soundly." "And what time was this discussion?" Poirot asked. Rossi hesitated, his fingers toying with his lighter. "Perhaps 11. I did not check my watch." "Merci, signor," Poirot said, dismissing him with a nod. Miss Clara Henshaw approached next, her steps hesitant, her hands clutching her handkerchief as though it were a lifeline. Her face was pale, her eyes darting nervously to the other passengers. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm only a governess. I know nothing of such dreadful things." Poirot's expression softened, but his eyes remained sharp. "Mademoiselle, you alerted the steward to a noise this morning, but last night in the corridor you were seen near Monsieur Baxter's compartment. What brought you there?" Her cheeks flushed, and she twisted the handkerchief. I was lost, monsieur. The train, it is confusing at night. I thought I heard a sound, a cry perhaps, near midnight, but when I looked, the corridor was empty. I returned to my compartment and locked the door. "A cry," Poirot repeated, his voice gentle but probing. "And you saw no one?" "No one, monsieur, I swear it." Poirot nodded, his gaze lingering on her trembling hands. "Merci, mademoiselle." The Lisles were interviewed together at Poirot's insistence, their faces pale and drawn. Edward, his jaw tight, spoke first. "Monsieur Poirot, my wife and I were together all night. We're on our honeymoon, you see. We retired after dinner and stayed in our compartment." Eleanor nodded, her voice soft. "We heard nothing, monsieur. We took a sleeping draught, as I sometimes have trouble resting on trains." Poirot's eyes flickered to her hands, noting the faint tremor. "A sleeping draught, madame. Prescribed?" "Yes," she said quickly. "From a doctor in London. It's quite common." "Indeed," Poirot said, his tone neutral. And you saw no one? Heard nothing? Near midnight? Nothing, Edward said firmly, his arm around his wife. We were asleep. Poirot dismissed them with a nod, his mind already turning. Finally, Mehmet Bey approached, his demeanour calm, almost detached. He sat crossing one leg over the other, his cigarette case resting on the table. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice smooth, I'm a diplomat, accustomed to discretion. I have no wish to be entangled in this affair. Yet you were in the corridor last night, monsieur, Poirot said, his eyes fixed on Mehmet's. Smoking, near midnight, when a cry was heard. What did you see? Mehmet's fingers brushed the cigarette case, a fleeting gesture. I saw nothing, monsieur. I was reflecting, as I often do at night. The corridor was empty save for myself. And the cry? Poirot pressed. I heard no cry, Mehmet said, his gaze steady. Only the train, the wind. Poirot leaned back, his hands folded. Merci, Monsieur Bey. That will be all for now. As the passengers returned to their seats, Poirot stood, his gaze sweeping the car. Mesdames et messieurs, your cooperation is noted, but know this. The truth, it cannot be hidden forever. The Midnight Express is a small world, and within it, I will find the one who has disrupted its harmony. The passengers dispersed, their murmurs trailing behind them. Hastings, leaning close, whispered, Poirot, they all seem plausible, yet none of them feel quite right. The Countess's knife, Rossi's argument, Henshaw's nervousness. How do you make sense of it? Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. Sense, Hastings, comes from the alignment of facts. Each has told me something, and each has hidden something. The knife, the cry, the locked door, they are threads in a tapestry, and I, Hercule Poirot, will weave them together. As the snow continued to fall outside, sealing the train in its icy embrace, Poirot's mind churned, his little grey cells alive with the challenge of unravelling the mystery of Compartment 12. Chapter 5. The Clues. The Midnight Express remained stranded in the snowy Alpine Pass, its gleaming carriages encased in a hush of frost, as though the mountains themselves conspired to hold the passengers in suspense. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the passengers' faces etched with unease as they avoided each other's gazes in the corridors. Hercule Poirot, however, was undeterred by the atmosphere of dread. His small, meticulous figure moved with purpose as he returned to Compartment 12, the scene of Leonard Baxter's murder, his patent leather shoes silent on the carpeted floor. Captain Hastings followed, his brow furrowed, his hands thrust into his pockets as if to steady his nerves. Poirot, Hastings said, his voice low as they approached the locked door. This business is getting murkier by the minute. A locked compartment, a fancy knife, and all those passengers with their alibis. It's like trying to solve a jigsaw with half the pieces missing. Poirot's green eyes glinted with a quiet intensity. Non, mon ami, the pieces are all here. It is merely a matter of arranging them correctly. The clues, they speak if one knows how to listen. He produced a small magnifying glass from his pocket, its silver frame catching the dim light of the corridor, and nodded to Monsieur Duval, who stood guard. The conductor unlocked the door, his hands trembling slightly. Monsieur Poirot, I have ensured no one has entered since your last visit. The body remains as you left it. Merci, Monsieur Duval, Poirot said, stepping into the compartment. The scene was unchanged. Baxter's body lay on the berth, the mother-of-pearl-handled knife still embedded in his chest. The crimson stain on his shirt now darkened. The gold watch ticked softly on the bedside table, its hands still frozen at 2:17. The empty wallet lay open, its leather creased, and the crushed cigar rested on the floor, its faint smudge of lipstick a silent accusation. Poirot began his examination with methodical precision, his magnifying glass hovering over the cigar. The lipstick was a soft rose shade, distinct against the cigar's white paper. "Curieux," he murmured, slipping the cigar into a small envelope. "This is not the colour of Madame Volkoff's lips, nor, I suspect, Mademoiselle Henshaw's. We must consider Madame Lyle." Hastings frowned. "Eleanor Lyle! But she's barely said a word. And a cigar. Hardly a lady's habit." Poirot's lips twitched. "Habits, Hastings, are not always what they seem. The cigar was not smoked to the end, yet it is crushed, as if to suggest a presence that may not have been real." He turned to the knife, examining its handle closely. The mother of pearl was intricately carved, and the initials IV were etched in delicate script. "This belongs to the Countess, as she admitted," Poirot said. "But it's theft in Paris. It is too convenient, n'est-ce pas? A thief who takes a knife but leaves her jewels?" He moved to the bedside table, where the gold watch gleamed. Its crystal was unmarred, its mechanism still functioning. The watch was not taken, yet the wallet is empty. A selective thief, or one who wishes us to believe in theft. He opened the wallet, noting a faint indentation inside, as though a card or paper had been removed. Something was taken, but not money alone. Poirot's gaze shifted to the wardrobe, where Baxter's leather case rested. He opened it, sifting through the papers within. The railway contract mentioning Mehmet Bey was still there, its edges slightly crumpled, as though handled in haste. Another document caught his eye. A letter, written in a hurried scrawl, addressed to Baxter. It read, "You will regret crossing me. The deal is off." The signature was illegible, but the ink was fresh, the paper crisp. Poirot folded it carefully, his mind turning. "Hastings," he said, "fetch me a clean dish cloth from the washstand." Hastings complied, and Poirot used the cloth to lift a small glass from the bedside table, its interior clouded with a faint residue. He sniffed it cautiously, detecting a bitter undertone. "A sedative, perhaps," he murmured, "administered before the fatal blow to ensure compliance." He stepped back, his hands clasped behind him, his head tilted as he surveyed the compartment. The window, sealed tight, showed no signs of tampering. The lock on the door was intact, its key undisturbed. Yet the cry he had heard at midnight, the slammed door, the cigarette glow of Mehmet Bey, these lingered in his mind, threads in a tapestry yet to be woven. Leaving the compartment, Poirot instructed Duval to lock it once more, and led Hastings to the dining car, where a discarded napkin lay crumpled on a table. Poirot retrieved it, noting a faint ink smudge, a partial fingerprint barely visible. "This, Hastings, is a whisper of the truth," he said, slipping it into another envelope. "The hand that left this mark may have left others." Their next stop was Miss Henshaw's compartment. Poirot knocked politely, and the governess opened the door, her face pale, her eyes wide with apprehension. "Monsieur Poirot," she stammered, I have nothing more to tell." "May I enter, mademoiselle?" Poirot asked, his tone gentle but firm. She stepped aside, and Poirot's eyes swept the small space. A novel lay on her berth, its pages marked with a ribbon at a chapter titled The Locked Room. Poirot's eyebrows rose slightly. "An interesting choice of reading, mademoiselle. You have an interest in mysteries." Her cheeks flushed. "It's only a book, monsieur. A distraction. Naturellement," Poirot said, his smile disarming. "But distractions, they often reveal the mind's preoccupations." In the Lyles' compartment, Poirot's request to inspect their luggage was met with nervous compliance. Among Eleanor's belongings, he found a small vial labelled Dr. Harrow's sleeping draught, its contents half empty. "Madame," he said, holding it up, "this is the draught you mentioned?" Eleanor nodded, her voice trembling. "Yes, monsieur, for my insomnia. I took it last night, as I told you." "And you, Monsieur Lyle?" Poirot asked, turning to Edward. "You also took this?" Edward hesitated, then nodded. "A small dose, to help me rest." Poirot's eyes lingered on the vial, noting its prescription date, recent, from a London chemist. "Merci," he said, returning it. As they left, He murmured to Hastings, "The draught. It is potent. Enough to sedate a man like Baxter, perhaps." In the corridor, Poirot paused, his mind racing. The lipstick on the cigar suggested a woman's presence, yet Eleanor Lyle's delicate demeanour seemed at odds with the violence of the crime. The Countess's knife, stolen yet conveniently placed, pointed to a deliberate misdirection. Mehmet Bey's contract linked him to Baxter, but his calm denial of the midnight cry was too polished. Miss Henshaw's nervous reading of locked-room mysteries hinted at knowledge, or perhaps fear. And the Lyles, their anxious unity, their shared draught. It was a thread that tugged at Poirot's instincts. "Hastings," he said, his voice low. "The clues, they are like stars in a constellation. Alone, they are points of light. Together they form a picture. The locked door. It is the key, not to entry, but to deception. Someone wishes us to believe the impossible." Hastings shook his head, bewildered. "But who, Poirot? And how? The door was locked, the window sealed. It's madness." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Madness or method? The murderer has left a trail, Hastings, and we shall follow it. The cigar, the knife, the papers, the fingerprint, they speak of intent, of calculation. We must listen carefully." As the snow continued to fall outside, sealing the midnight express in its frozen solitude, Poirot's little grey cells churned, piecing together the fragments of a crime that was as intricate as it was audacious. Chapter 6. The Revelation. The dining car of the midnight express was a study in contrasts as evening settled over the stranded train, still locked in the grip of the alpine snow. The chandeliers cast a warm glow over the polished tables, their crystal facets refracting light in delicate patterns. Yet the atmosphere was heavy with suspicion. The passengers, summoned once more by Hercule Poirot, sat in a tense tableau, their faces a mosaic of fear, defiance, and guarded curiosity. The snow outside had thickened, blanketing the windows in a soft white veil, isolating the train further and lending an almost theatrical intimacy to the gathering. Poirot stood at the head of the car, his small, fastidious figure radiating authority, his moustache impeccably symmetrical, his green eyes gleaming with the quiet confidence of a man who had glimpsed the truth. Captain Hastings stood near the door, his arms crossed, his expression a blend of anticipation and unease. He had seen Poirot unravel mysteries before, but the locked compartment, the ornate knife, and the tangled web of alibis had left him grasping at shadows. The passengers, seated at their tables, were a study in contrasts. Countess Irina Volkov, her elegance unshaken but her eyes wary. Signor Giovanni Rossi, his flamboyant scarf now subdued, his fingers restless. Miss Clara Henshaw, her hands twisting a handkerchief into knots. Mehmet Bey, his cigarette case clutched like a talisman. And the Lyles, Edward and Eleanor, their faces pale, their hands clasped as if to shield each other from the impending storm. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice clear and resonant, slicing through the silence like a well-aimed dart. "A crime has been committed aboard this train, a crime of calculation and audacity. Monsieur Leonard Baxter was murdered in a locked compartment, stabbed with a knife bearing the initials of Madame Volkov. Yet the truth is not so simple. I, Hercule Poirot, have examined the clues, listened to your words, and observed what you did not say. The little grey cells, they have worked tirelessly, and now the tapestry of this mystery is complete." A collective intake of breath rippled through the car. Irina's fingers tightened on her stole. Rossi's lighter clicked shut, and Miss Henshaw's handkerchief tore slightly under her grip. Mehmet Bey's face remained impassive, but his eyes narrowed. Edward Lyle shifted, his arm protective around Eleanor, who stared at Poirot with wide, fearful eyes. Poirot paced slowly, his hands clasped behind him, his voice measured but relentless. "Let us begin with the scene of the crime. A locked compartment, a knife of exquisite design, a gold watch untouched, a wallet emptied, a crushed cigar with a trace of lipstick. These are not random elements, but a deliberate composition. The knife, it points to Madame Volkoff, yet she claims it was stolen. The cigar suggests a woman's presence, perhaps Madame Lyle. The contract in Monsieur Baxter's case implicates Monsieur Mehmet Bey. And Mademoiselle Henshaw, her knowledge of locked-room mysteries is most suggestive. Gasps punctuated his words, but Poirot raised a hand, silencing them. But the heart of this puzzle is the locked door. The window was sealed, the lock intact. How then did the murderer escape? The answer is simple. They did not. He turned to face the passengers, his gaze sweeping over them like a searchlight. The murderer was still in the compartment when the body was discovered, hidden in the one place we did not look, the wardrobe. Hastings, unable to contain himself, whispered, "Good Lord, Poirot, you don't mean—" Poirot ignored him, his focus unwavering. "Let us consider the clues. The cigar, with its trace of rose lipstick, does not belong to Madame Volkoff, whose shade is crimson, nor to Mademoiselle Henshaw, who wears none. It points to Madame Lyle, yet her demeanour is delicate, her alibi shared with her husband. The sleeping draught in their possession, however, is potent, capable of sedating a man like Baxter. The contract links Monsieur Mehmet Bey to Baxter's business, a motive for elimination, and the fingerprint on the napkin found in the dining car matches one left on the wardrobe's handle." He produced the napkin, its faint ink smudge now a damning piece of evidence. "This fingerprint, it belongs to Monsieur Edward Lyle." Edward Lyle's face drained of colour, his hand tightening on Eleanor's. "This is absurd," he stammered, his voice rising. "I was in my compartment all night, with my wife. You have no proof." Poirot's smile was serene but unyielding. "Proof, monsieur? The proof is in the details. You and Madame Lyle were in debt to Monsieur Baxter, were you not? His promissory notes, found among his papers, threatened your ruin. You saw an opportunity on this train, a confined stage where suspicion could be scattered like seeds." He turned to the Countess. "Madame Volkoff, your knife was stolen, yes, but not in Paris. It was taken here, on the train, by someone who knew its value as a distraction. You had no motive to kill Baxter, but your knife was a convenient tool to cast suspicion." Irina's eyes widened, but she said nothing, her composure holding. To Rossi, Poirot said, "Signor, your argument with Baxter was loud, public, but it was not the cause of his death. You sought to protect your reputation, not to kill." Rossi exhaled, his shoulders sagging with relief. To Miss Henshaw, Poirot's tone softened. "Mademoiselle, your nervousness, your reading of locked-room mysteries, it was not guilt, but fear. You heard the cry at midnight, saw a shadow in the corridor, and your imagination, it painted you as a suspect. But you are innocent." Miss Henshaw's eyes filled with tears, her handkerchief pressed to her lips. To Mehmet Bey, Poirot said, "Monsieur, your contract with Baxter was a point of contention, but your presence in the corridor was not to kill, but to observe. You suspected trouble, did you not?" Mehmet nodded slowly, his cigarette case still in hand. "I suspected Baxter's dealings were not honest, but I did not act." Finally, Poirot faced the Lyles. "Monsieur and Madame Lyle, your honeymoon was a facade, a cover for desperation. You, monsieur, entered Baxter's compartment, using your wife's sleeping draught to sedate him. You stabbed him with the stolen knife, crushing the cigar, borrowed from Madame Lyle's belongings to suggest her presence. You hid in the wardrobe, waiting for the chaos of discovery to slip out, your cologne betraying you in the confined space." Eleanor sobbed, her hands covering her face. "It's true," she cried. "Baxter was going to ruin us. He held our debts, threatened to expose Edward's business failures. We had no choice." Edward's face crumpled, his defiance collapsing. I did it to protect her," he whispered. "He was a monster." Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "The law, it does not excuse murder, monsieur. You chose a path of destruction, and now you must face its consequences." The passengers sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation settling over them. Monsieur Duval stepped forward, his face grim. "Monsieur Poirot, shall I secure Monsieur Lyle?" "Oui," Poirot said. "He will be held until we reach Istanbul, where the authorities will take charge." As Edward was led away, Eleanor clinging to him until separated by the conductor, the dining car emptied, the passengers retreating to their compartments in silence. Poirot remained, his hands clasped, his gaze distant. Hastings, shaking his head, said, "You're a marvel, Poirot. The wardrobe? How did you know?" Poirot tapped his temple, his smile faint. "The little grey cells, Hastings. They see what is hidden. The cologne, the fingerprint, the draught. They were the notes of a symphony, and I merely conducted them to their conclusion." As the snow continued to fall, sealing the midnight express in its icy cocoon, Poirot's mind was already at rest, the puzzle solved, the order restored. Chapter 7. The Resolution. The midnight express stirred to life as the snow was cleared from the tracks, its wheels groaning against the rails, signalling the resumption of its journey toward Istanbul. The Alpine Pass, with its stark peaks and frosted valleys, receded into the distance, but the shadow of the crime lingered within the train's polished carriages. The passengers, subdued by the revelation of Edward Lyle's guilt, kept to their compartments, their voices hushed, their interactions minimal. The dining car, once a stage for lively discourse, now held only the soft clink of cutlery, as a few ventured to take their evening meal under the watchful eye of Monsieur Duval, the conductor. Hercule Poirot sat at a corner table, a cup of black coffee before him, its steam curling in the air like a question mark. His grey suit was immaculate, his moustache a perfect curve, but his green eyes held a reflective depth, as though he were contemplating not just the crime, but the human frailties it had exposed. Captain Hastings, seated opposite, stirred his tea absent-mindedly, his face a mixture of awe and melancholy. "I say, Poirot," Hastings ventured, his voice low, "you've done it again. Unravelled the whole thing like a skein of wool. But I can't help feeling a bit sorry for the Lyles. They were desperate, weren't they?" Poirot's gaze shifted to the window, where the darkening landscape blurred past, the train's rhythm a steady counterpoint to his thoughts. "Desperation, mon ami. It is a powerful force, but it does not justify the taking of a life. Monsieur Lyle chose a path of violence, and Madame Lyle, she supported him, knowingly or not. The human heart, it is complex, driven by fear, by love, by greed. But the law, it must remain impartial." Hastings nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "Still, it's a grim business. That poor woman, Eleanor, sobbing like that. And Edward, facing the gallows, I suppose?" Poirot sipped his coffee, his movements precise. "The gallows, perhaps, or a long imprisonment. That is for the courts in Istanbul to decide. Our task was to uncover the truth, and that we have done." The dining car door opened, admitting Monsieur Duval, his uniform slightly rumpled from the day's strain. He approached Poirot's table, his face etched with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, the passengers are calmer now, thanks to you. Monsieur Lyle is secured in a locked compartment, guarded by my steward. Madame Lyle, she is with the Countess, who has offered her comfort." "Bien," Poirot said, his tone measured. "And the other passengers? They are cooperative?" Duval nodded. "Oui, monsieur. The Countess, she is shaken but composed. Signor Rossi has offered to sing for the passengers tomorrow, to lift their spirits. Mademoiselle Henshaw keeps to herself, reading her books, And Monsieur Mehmet Bey, he has been most discreet, though he asked me to convey his thanks for your clarity." Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile. "Clarity. It is the gift of order, Monsieur Duval. You have been most helpful. Ensure the evidence, the knife, the cigar, the napkin, is preserved for the authorities." Duval bowed slightly and retreated, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone. The train's gentle sway was soothing, yet Poirot's mind remained active, replaying the threads of the case. The ornate knife, stolen from Irina Volkov to cast suspicion. The crushed cigar, its lipstick a deliberate misdirection. The sleeping draught, used to subdue Baxter. The fingerprint, betraying Edward Lyle's presence in the wardrobe. Each clue had been a note in a symphony of deception, and Poirot had conducted it to its inevitable conclusion. "Hastings," he said, setting down his cup, "you recall the cry I heard at midnight? The slammed door? The glow of Monsieur Bey's cigarette? They were the first whispers of this crime, yet they told me nothing until the clues aligned. The wardrobe, it was the key, not just to the murderer's escape, but to his arrogance. He believed he could hide in plain sight." Hastings shook his head, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "You make it sound so simple, Poirot. I was ready to believe in ghosts or secret passages, but a wardrobe? It's almost too mundane." "Mundane?" Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Non, mon ami. The truth, it is often simple, but it is never mundane. It is the human mind that complicates, that weaves lies to obscure what is plain. Edward Lyle thought to outwit us all, but he forgot the power of observation, of method. The dining car was nearly empty now, save for a waiter clearing the last of the tables. Outside, the night was deep, the stars obscured by clouds, but the train's motion was a promise of progress, of resolution. Poirot rose, adjusting his tie with a practiced gesture. "Come, Hastings, let us take the air in the corridor. The night, it is calm now, but it has spoken its secrets." They stepped into the corridor, where the brass fittings gleamed under the soft glow of the sconces. The train's rhythm was a steady pulse, and Poirot paused by a window, gazing into the darkness. "The Midnight Express," he murmured. "It is a microcosm of life, is it not? Confined, elegant, yet filled with passion and peril." Hastings chuckled, his mood lightening. "You're waxing poetic again, Poirot, but I'll grant you, this journey's been anything but dull." Poirot's smile was enigmatic. "Dull, Hastings? With Hercule Poirot aboard, dullness is an impossibility. The little grey cells, they ensure that order prevails, even in the darkest of nights." As the Midnight Express rolled onward, carrying its passengers toward their destination, Poirot's mind was at ease, the puzzle solved, the harmony restored. The truth had been uncovered, and the train, like life itself, moved forward into the unknown. Chapter 8. The Journey's End. The Midnight Express thundered through the night, its wheels singing a relentless anthem against the tracks as it neared Istanbul, the final destination of its transcontinental voyage. The snows of the Alps were a distant memory, replaced by the rolling plains and shadowed hills of the Balkans, their outlines softened by the moonlight filtering through scattered clouds. Within the train, the atmosphere had shifted from the claustrophobic tension of the previous days to a quiet resignation, as though the passengers had accepted the weight of the truth uncovered by Hercule Poirot. The dining car, now dimly lit, held only a few souls lingering over late-night coffee, their conversations subdued, their eyes avoiding the empty seats once occupied by Edward Lyle and Leonard Baxter. Poirot sat in his compartment, the mahogany panels reflecting the soft glow of a single lamp. His small, fastidious figure was as composed as ever, his grey suit pristine, his moustache a perfect crescent. Before him, on the narrow table, lay a notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes in his precise handwriting, sketches of the crime scene, timelines, and observations about each passenger. He sipped a tisane, its herbal aroma calming, and gazed out the window, where the landscape blurred into a tapestry of darkness and starlight. Captain Hastings entered, his tweed coat slightly rumpled, his face bearing the weariness of the past day's events. He sank onto the berth opposite Poirot, running a hand through his hair. "Well, Poirot," he said, his voice tinged with relief, "we're nearly there. Istanbul tomorrow morning, and then this whole grim affair can be handed over to the authorities. I must say, I'll be glad to see the back of this train." Poirot's green eyes flickered with a trace of amusement. "Mon ami, you speak as though the journey itself were the villain. The Midnight Express. It is merely a stage, and we, its players. The drama, it was born of human hearts, not of steel and steam." Hastings chuckled, shaking his head. "You've a way of making even murder sound philosophical, Poirot. But I confess, I'm still reeling from how you pieced it all together. The wardrobe, the lipstick, the sleeping draught. It's like watching a magician pull a rabbit from a hat." Poirot set down his tisane, his expression thoughtful. "A magician, perhaps, but one who relies not on sleight of hand, but on the order and method of the little grey cells. The truth, Hastings, it is always there, waiting to be seen. The wardrobe was not merely a hiding place, but a confession of audacity. Edward Lyle believed he could outwit us all, but he underestimated the power of observation." The compartment door opened softly, admitting Monsieur Duval, the conductor, his uniform crisp despite the late hour. He carried a small tray with a fresh pot of coffee, which he set on the table with a deferential nod. "Monsieur Poirot, I thought you might need refreshment. The passengers, they are restless, but they speak of you with awe. Your resolution of this tragedy has restored some calm." "Merci, Monsieur Duval," Poirot said, inclining his head. "And how far's Madame Lyle? She is with the Countess, I understand." Duval's face grew sombre. "Oui, monsieur. Madame Volkov has been kind, sitting with her, offering words of comfort. Madame Lyle is distraught, but she has not spoken against her husband. She says only that they were driven to desperation." Poirot nodded, his fingers tracing the edge of his notebook. "Desperation. It is a cruel master. And the other passengers?" "They keep to themselves," Duval replied. "Signor Rossi has promised a song tomorrow to mark our arrival in Istanbul. Mademoiselle Henshaw reads her books, though she avoids the others. Monsieur Mehmet Bey has been most courteous, assisting with translations for the stewards as we prepare for the authorities." "Bien," Poirot said. "Ensure that all evidence is ready for the police in Istanbul. The knife, the cigar, the napkin, the papers, they must tell their story clearly." Duval bowed and withdrew, leaving Poirot and Hastings in the quiet of the compartment. The train's rhythm was a steady pulse, a reminder of the journey's inexorable progress. Poirot opened his notebook, reviewing a final detail. A sketch of the mother-of-pearl knife, its initials IV stark against the intricate handle. "The knife," he murmured. "It was the first misstep. Too distinctive, too traceable. Lyle thought it would point to the Countess, but it pointed instead to his own calculation." Hastings leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. "Poirot, there's one thing I still don't quite grasp. The cry you heard at midnight. How did you know it was connected to the murder? It could have been anything. A passenger startled, or a door slamming." Poirot's smile was faint but knowing. "The cry, Hastings. It was not merely a sound, but a signal. It came from the direction of Baxter's compartment, followed by the slammed door. And then Monsieur Mehmet Bey, smoking in the corridor, his presence too convenient to be coincidence. I suspected then that the cry marked the moment of the crime, or its prelude. The little grey cells, they do not rest until each note in the symphony is accounted for. Hastings shook his head, a grin spreading across his face. "You're a marvel, Poirot. I'd have been chasing shadows, but you see the whole picture, clear as day." Poirot closed his notebook, his hands folding neatly in his lap. "The picture. It is never clear at first, mon ami. It is like a mosaic, built piece by piece. The lipstick on the cigar, the sleeping draught, the fingerprint, they were fragments, but together they formed the truth. Edward Lyle's desperation, it blinded him to the simplicity of his error." The train's whistle sounded, a mournful note that echoed through the night, signalling a brief stop at a small station. Poirot glanced out the window, where a platform flickered briefly into view, its lanterns casting pools of light on the cobblestones. "Istanbul approaches," he said softly, "and with it the end of this chapter. But the human heart, it will always write new stories, new mysteries." Hastings yawned, stretching his arms. "Well, I hope the next one's a bit less deadly. A quiet holiday, perhaps, with no locked rooms or fancy knives." Poirot's eyes twinkled with mischief. "A quiet holiday, Hastings? With you and I together, such a thing is impossible. The world, it has a way of presenting its puzzles to Hercule Poirot." As the train gathered speed, plunging deeper into the night, Poirot leaned back, his tisane finished, his mind at peace. The Midnight Express had been a stage for tragedy, but also for truth, and Poirot, with his unerring instinct for order, had ensured that justice would follow. The lights of Istanbul loomed on the horizon, and with them the promise of resolution, as the train carried its passengers and their secrets toward the dawn.